it's an industry in which a lot of people think they just know. I've got a lot of experience. I've built a lot of jobs. I can sniff the progress. I can go out there. So there's a bit of that. So I think that's one of the problems. I think, to be fair, the systems software and computer systems weren't particularly available up to about 20 years ago. You know, things like Power BI, for instance, have transformed the way we do this stuff, and the ability to house large amounts of data and so on and so forth and visualize it. You know, if I go back to when I started in the 90s on the PFI projects, hospitals and prisons, you know, you did it in Excel, then you produced a pivot table, you know, and it was all very manual. And the problem with that was it worked fine at a site level, but you couldn't share that up through the organization. You couldn't aggregate a dozen projects using that type of reporting into one summary report or anything like that, except by doing it manually. So I think the availability of systems and software and computer power has made a big difference. That's probably been the enabler. But I think fundamentally there's been a lack of recognition of the importance of it. You know, what drove me in the early days was the damages, the risks associated with doing PFI work. We were carrying enormous damages for late completion on those projects, disproportionate really to the profit in the projects or the size of the projects. So you needed a capability to be at least on top of the progress side of things. So that was the driver for me. It was how do we manage these big projects? How do we mitigate risk? And I remember walking down, you know, the corridor of a hospital we were building in South London, and you know, all the way down the corridor walls were graphs showing production of all the key trades, and that was the first time I'd seen that done. You know, and that was an enlightened project manager and an enlightened business, all trying to mitigate their risk. So I think risk has definitely been a driver. I think the amount of construction failures we've probably seen in the last 10, 15 years has probably woken people up a little bit to it as well. You know, we do see a lot of failures now, but mostly I think the primary blocker was recognition of the value and its ability to mitigate risk, and lack of capability of systems. You know, I think both those things have changed in the last 5 or 10 years.